All right, guys. I've been brainstorming different ways to get into my entire rehab story, and I've been trying to figure out where to go. You can hear there's some noise in the background, but I decided to just record and kind of see what happens. Because it's a temptation to try and be perfect about the process. It's a temptation in our lives. It's a temptation I've had in my life for a long time. What's the perfect version of there is no perfect version. So here's my story. We're gonna go back in time. In 2004, I entered a seminary, a Catholic seminary. It was a Benedictine monastery in Mission, British Columbia. And at this time in my life, I hadn't had any struggles with addiction. I did eat, because kind of like I ate too much, so I had that going, but there was no drugs, there was no alcohol, no gambling yet. And these 3 years of my life, from 2004 to 8, I had 1 year off, were extremely formative. So those of you who know and are familiar with the church, with the Catholic Church and the discernment process, I'm gonna do a bunch of videos that you're not gonna like potentially, or hopefully you'll be open to. But when you enter, you are coming in intending to be a priest, or at least being extremely open to the fact that God is calling you to be a priest. And so we call that a vocation. And vocation is from the Latin term vocare, which is to call. And the church often breaks it down into 2, maximum 3 categories, right? You're either called to be a priest, if you're a man, if you're a male. You're called to be a priest, you're called to be to the married life, or you might be called to the single life. But even now, the single life is it's like you're probably called to the married life, right? And so when you go in to be a priest, stay with me on this story because it's gonna really impact how the addiction started. When you go in to be a priest, it's an elevated vocation. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes the people around you in communities, in Catholic communities, in circles, sometimes your family, and my family was really good at not doing this, is they treat you like you're better than other people, right? You're elevated, you're a young man who was, hey, this guy went in to be a Catholic priest, like, holy crap, right? And so you get that elevated feeling. And 3 years in, I'll do more videos on this later, but 3 years in, I was basically told that I didn't have a vocation. Now, that's one of the possible outcomes when you go in, right? But when you're a Catholic guy and your family's Catholic and the people around you are looking up to you because you've gone to the seminary and you have that feeling that this is important, this is what I'm called to do, this is the meaning in my life, right? Because that's where my meaning was. My meaning was I'm called to be a priest, right? And then I was told in March of 2008 that they didn't think I had a vocation. And I was told in a very personal way that probably will, as we go through my story, qualifies as psychological abuse, the way the information was handed to me and the reason why, right? And I'm gonna be very vulnerable right now on here and tell you that it was tied to my own personal sexuality and not being able to control what many people consider to be extremely normal urges, right? And this is going on the internet. I'm fine with it. I'm being vulnerable. And so because of one priest's take on what the spectrum of chastity is, and I don't want to sound bitter when I say that, but I'm just describing my story, I was suddenly no longer in the seminary. And not only that, I went from everything in my life being directed towards one end, one goal, to it all being taken away. And so I got out of the seminary and I proceeded to have destruction in my life, like chaos. And those were some of the first times, like I can remember when I was in the seminary, there was a couple of times, there was a vacation in 2007 when my friend got married in Prince Edward Island. He's one of my closest most overtime, meaningful people in my life. Like maybe the most, probably the most, if easily. But we went out there and we partied. He didn't party, but a few of us partied. And I remember that was the first time I really drank hard. But it wasn't until after I left the seminary with this news that, hey, this isn't your vocation, that I started to seek out alcohol, mainly because I was seeking out people who weren't Catholic, right? On purpose, because all the Catholic people wanted to talk about, oh, you're not in the seminary anymore. Like, how does that work? We don't understand. We don't, most of them meant well. But my entire identity and my dream, because I found this out in therapy later, at that time, my dream was to be a Catholic priest. What does this have to do with sobriety, right? Well, 2008, I started getting into alcohol, and my life started to go from one, my story prior to that was very straightforward. Homeschooling, family, go to the seminary, maybe eat a little bit too much, but then the alcohol started to creep in 2008. And actually, it was gambling that was my first addiction. And so gambling hit me, and this is ironic, right? So I'm out of the seminary, had a girlfriend that was 10 years older than me with 3 kids right away, which wasn't good for me, but I was seeking to fill that connection that I needed to find because I was so stripped of identity and so lost, But keeping myself on track here, in 2009, if we fast forward, I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So here I am. I was born in 86, so 2009, I'm 23 years old. I get type 1 diabetes, late onset. Usually smaller children get it. And I went into Edmonton for a course. So they give you like a day-long course. And that was the first time that I ever played poker in a casino. Was exactly the same time as I went for my first diabetes class. Now, it's pretty funny looking at that as I tell you this, because I'm making all these connections, right? Like, this diagnosis of type 1 diabetes was so hard for me to take, and at the same time I discovered cards, right? So I started gambling. And one sec. So I started gambling. And the gambling went through a few iterations. It was really hard. It was very destructive in my life. It was my first extremely destructive addiction. But I moved through that, and I ended up in Edmonton. And let's just skip over a few years, right? I got into sales. Was very good at it. And then, there's way more, but I'm just skipping ahead for the sake of getting a video in here for you guys. 2013. So I'm thinking, when was the first time that alcohol really, really caused havoc in my life? And there's probably a couple of earlier times, but 2013 April, okay? In 2013 April, I got my first DUI. And I don't have more than one DUI, but I really fucking tried really hard to get more than one. And so I'm just gonna keep this here. Okay, so 2013, I get a DUI. And what's interesting is the event that happens prior to that DUI is my dad getting in a car accident. So my dad gets in a car accident in January, on January the 5th of 2013. Okay. And in April, my mom's staying at my place. I had an apartment in Westmount. My sister's there. I go to the casino. I drop, I think it was close to $2,000 playing cards, but I drank. So I drank 15, 20 beers, something like that. And I hit a Honda Civic, and I woke up in the Royal Alec. And I went home, and I had my head wrapped. I had gotten a concussion. And I remember getting calls from relatives, and they were worried about me, but they were compassionate towards me because my dad had been in a car accident. And so that was probably one of the first times that alcohol severely affected my life. But I got extremely lucky because people viewed it as a natural reaction to what had happened to my dad, right? Because my dad was in a coma. Our lives were completely turned upside down. And so it seemed sort of fair that I could drink and drive, even though that's not true. Stick with me. We're going to keep this going. I'm just relighting my cigar. So 2013 is the biggest moment, the first biggest moment that alcohol starts affecting me. So now let's fast forward, because I would go through these ups and these downs, right? Like I drank, I had a DUI, I lost my driver's license, I lost my job. But then I would come around, learn to use the bus. I was great at sales, go back to sales, stop drinking, right? And so then things started going well again. And then we fast forward to 2015. So my dad was in and out of rehab for 2 years. And look, it's really easy if I was a fly on the wall in my life, just bear with me here. If I was a fly on the wall in my life, like, hey Mike, your dad's in the hospital, like, of course you're drinking, right? It's really easy to see that and say, okay, we often give people a pass when they have tragedy happening. But basically, my dad passed away in 2015. And keep in mind, during all of these times, I'm drinking still, I'm talking about alcohol with my friends. My close friends are suggesting, like, dude, you drink too much. And I'm kind of not accepting that. I'm in sales, we like to drink, we like to party. And after dad died, because I went for like a year and a half, I can remember from like early 2014, things got successful for me again. And I was doing good at energy sales. But then after dad died, obviously that did something to me that I didn't realize. I started drinking more, and then I discovered cocaine. And in and out of these like 5 years, like, so go back to 2009, 10, when I started gambling, I had 2 or 3 cycles of that where I would gamble and then I would stop gambling and work. And then I would gamble and lose, right? Like I would lose like badly, like to the point of rent being an issue. And it happened 2 or 3 times, right? So in 2015, I discovered Coke. And there was a moment in late 2015, it would have been my birthday. If you're still with me, you're a champion on this story. Thank you for listening. In 2015, late 2015, I was partying. It was my birthday. Yeah, it was my birthday, right? Okay. And we went out, we went for drinks. People did a couple of things here and there. And I can still remember this. It was like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and I had done some cocaine. I was at my really close friend's place. And it was like time to go to bed. And I was so adamant that I needed more, that I wanted more, that we should keep this party going. And this was one of the first times, so here's what happens, right? This friend who really made an impact on me by what she did, she reached out to my family. So right at this time, here's my sister dealing with dad dying, 2015. And my friend reaches out to my sister, and my sister reaches out to my cousins in St. Albert. And so then my cousin my cousin Steve comes over to my house, which is, and at this time, my Uncle Phil also was trying to help me, text me like, hey, what's going on, blah, blah, blah. But this is when the start of like some intervention stuff is happening in my life, right? I still remember Steve coming over and sitting on my couch. My place wasn't super clean, and he took an approach that did help me, which was like, hey, like, what's going on in your life? Sounds like you're doing some stuff, and you should go talk to someone. You should go see a counselor. So versus I remember him sitting on my sectional in my apartment and being like, Mike, I feel like I should take you to rehab right now. And it's funny if you look back at that story and ask yourself, and you might be asking yourself this, because I went to rehab in 2017. So you might be saying, like, what if Steve had taken me to rehab in 2015? But in that moment, I wouldn't have gone willingly. But he basically said, listen, I'm not going to force you to go, but I want you to look into counselors and let me know when you do. And so I did that. I looked into counselors. I went and talked to a local psychologist who really helped me. We started talking about the seminary and all that stuff I hadn't dealt with from the seminary, and the vocation stuff. And that helped. But I went hard still, right? So January, February, I made some big life choices. I changed jobs when it made no sense. I ended up working with a guy who, I got taken advantage of, unfortunately, for a few $1,000s. And then, again, thank you for being with me in this story. I just want to get it out there, right? I ended up actually having a phone call with a friend of mine, and his name's Andy. And Andy probably doesn't remember this conversation, but we were talking about alcohol and partying and doing drugs, and he was kind of like, well, I mean, hey, you're an adult. You're allowed to do that, right? But is that what you want your life to look like? Because sometimes you got to figure out what you don't want to do. But he was sort of like posing a philosophical question to me, which was, is that how you want your life to look, right? Like you're going out on a Friday and you're not coming back till 10 a.m. on Saturday, and then you're doing it again. Like, is that what you want your life to look like? And so I quit. So I quit in March or April of 2016. Cold turkey on my own, no rehab. And I had an amazing spring, and I ended up going to Vancouver. I met this cool girl. I was on top of the world. But by July or August, I ended up slowly seeping into like a chronic clinical depression. I'm remembering these details like as I'm telling them, and it's telling my stories as much for me as it is hopefully for other people, anyone who's listening. And so I was in a chronic state of depression. Like I had to go live in my mom's house for 30 days or so. And I can remember the feeling of waking up in the morning and you're awake, but you can't get out of bed. Like you can't. And people think of depression as maybe you should just walk more, maybe you should get more water, maybe you should, and all those things really do help. They help once you're properly diagnosed, right? So I got extremely lucky and blessed to go to a doctor. So a friend of mine who's used to live in Edmonton, in Vancouver, he's like, hey, I got a doctor I know, maybe you got a new family doctor at Edmonton. This is right when I'm in clinical depression, staying at my mom's. And then he sends me to a psychiatrist that he actually did his practicum with. And So I go see that psychiatrist. And now, my mom plays a huge role at this point in the story. So obviously I'm at her house. She's forcing me out of bed every morning. She's driving me to medical appointments. She doesn't know what to do with me. My dad died a year and a half ago. But my dad had bipolar. He had bipolar 1. And I didn't know he had bipolar 1 until I was, I think, 16. Because all my dad did that seemed off from a health perspective was he drank a lot of water and he went to the washroom a lot. But he actually had bipolar. He got diagnosed at a young age. Not like diabetes young, but a younger age, right? Younger than me. And so there were many moments in my life, where I acted out or I was behaving a certain way, and people wondered if I had a mental health issue, right? Because my dad had it, why wouldn't I? So it could make sense. And so in 2016, through a process called historical diagnosis, so my mom put a ton, and my mom is my hero. I'll talk about her more, but she's a damn hero. Thanks, Mom. I love you, Mom. Probably maybe the only person watching right now. But my mom was able to sit with the psychiatrist and talk about my entire life and my ups and my downs, my swings and my behavior. And I met with the psychiatrist, and then I got diagnosed with bipolar 2. So just because this is so misunderstood, I'll quickly tell you the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. So bipolar 1 is marked by depressive episodes and by mania. Bipolar 2 is marked by mostly depressive episodes and hypomania. And so the difference between mania and hypomania is that mania is a loss of touch with reality. So a story about my dad, apparently when he was in his teenage years, he was studying for a history exam, a presentation, I think. And he stayed up all night, and the next day, he actually thought he was Napoleon for a while, right? And so that'd be mania, because he's lost touch with reality. But my episodes, and if I look back, I can see them. I see them in 2014, right? I had my DUI, then I came back, then suddenly I was super productive. I was super excited all the time. Hypomania. 2016, I went in, met that girl in Vancouver, right? And I was doing all this stuff. Hypomania. And so, but the hypomania isn't, you don't lose touch with reality. You have a lot less sleep. You're extremely productive all of a sudden, right? And so and it's funny because now my psychiatrist will tell me that my default is sort of a bit excited, a bit hyper, that's my personality, right? So I got on medication in 2016. And meanwhile, I'm sober. So let's stop here and just talk about something with sobriety, okay? If you get sober for enough time, I think it's a minimum of 90 days, it might be 180 days, right? But if you can do it for 3 to 6 months, you have no substances in you, that means your mental health will show up. So if you have an undiagnosed mental health disorder that's driving your addiction or affecting you, sobriety allows the medical community to properly intervene. But they can't, while you're drinking, while you're in active addiction, they can't distinguish between the side effects of even marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, all these drugs. They can't distinguish between that and your potential mental health. Thanks for letting me smoke. So, I get diagnosed with bipolar 2, and you know what? I remember laughing in the Walmart parking lot. My mom's driving me to pick up some medications, and I'm just like, well, fuck, of course I'm bipolar, bipolar 2. That, come on, Dad had it. I tried forever to get diagnosed. I didn't try super hard, but I was willing to talk to therapists and whatnot at various points in my life. So, okay, let's catch you up. So I have bipolar 2. I've been sober since March. It's 2016. Okay, great, perfect. I'm taking medications. I'm working with Carson. with my psychiatrist, and we're figuring out which medications work. Eventually, I end up taking something called lithium, and like I'm gonna take it tonight before bed. And guys, it's like I'll talk to you a lot about how my type 1 diabetes affects my life, but my bipolar 2, I forget that I have it. I don't remember, because that's how effective medication and talking to someone can be. So if you're worried, if you have a mental health disorder or someone you know, like it can be way better, right? Like I have it, and I don't think about it till we talk about it. In this scenario, it doesn't come up. Okay, so I get diagnosed, right? I'm sober, great. But the problem is I don't have a routine. So I was currently not working. I'm collecting residuals from an energy company, and I end up slowly go running out of money. And so what am I going to do? January comes, February comes, and I'll tell you something about medication. Medication is wonderful for people that need it, right? But it's only 50% of the battle. You still need to get good sleep, cut out substances, have a healthy life, have friendships, interactions, groups, eat well. That's the other 50%. And I didn't have that at this time. And so if you remember, Tom Brady, I'm a big fan, he played the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl. And this was in February of 2017. And it was a great game, and I was super tempted to drink. And I had been sober almost a year at this point. And I went to the liquor store, and I still remember driving there over in Westmount. And then I drove by, and I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then this thing kicked in that I'll talk about with you later. It comes from my friend Peter, my wonderful, true friend who potentially is a savior in my story for some of the things that he did. But he calls it like the fuck it mechanism, right? Like where you're just like, I had one M&M, fuck it. I'm gonna have 70, all of the M&Ms. It doesn't make any difference. And so my fuck it mechanism kicked in, and I went in and started drinking for the first time in an entire year. And I didn't just drink, like I did the old alcoholic addict, whatever you want to call it thing. I went in, I got a pack of beer, I still remember. I think I got rum. I think I got Sailor Jerry rum. That's probably what I got. And I got smashed. And Tom Brady came back. So, I mean, hey, it was a celebration, but it was gross, right? But what happened was that kicked into motion a really dark few months. So February, March, April, May, and I'm seeing Carson, but I'm drinking, I'm doing coke, and I was gambling again. And I'm running out of money. Okay? And so Carson says to me, we're catching up to the rehab point. For those of you who are like, tell us the fucking rehab story. What's going on here? So, rehab. Here we go. Carson says to me in May, maybe June-ish of 2017. Carson says, hey, you should maybe go to rehab. Because I was always open with him. You got to be open, by the way, with your psychiatrist, with your doctor. You got to just tell them the truth. And so I told him the truth, even when I was doing behavior that wasn't good for me. So he says, hey, you got to go to rehab. And so, Mike Walsh, if you know me, I like custom suits, and I like, feeling like I'm the man. And so when he told me that I should go to rehab, my reaction was like, whoa. And so I remember being at home, and I put on I remember this moment, it's vividly in my head. I went and put on my brown suit, and I was like, that's it, I'm getting a job. Like, I'm just gonna get a job. But within probably 15 minutes, I went to the casino, and then I probably ordered some cocaine, and then I had some drinks, and I drank some Grey Goose, right? And so while this is happening, right, he's telling me I should go to rehab. I also reached out to my Uncle Jim. Now, Uncle Jim, 3-4 years ago, had helped me with some debts. So he loaned me a few $1,000s and said, hey, I'll help you. Because I had gone through some stuff right around my dad's time with finances. And so he's like, I'll help you, but I got to take control of your account. etc. And so I let him do that. He helped me, and I paid him back. But I was like, okay, well, I'll just go back to that well again, right? Like Uncle Jim will help me again. Of course, he'll help me. And so I sent him an email. I was starting to run out of money here, right? That's what's happening. So I sent Uncle Jim an email, and but this time he didn't help me. He said, hey, like, you need to go to Salvation Army. You need to go get help. You need to... And I remember reading that email. I remember crying reading that email, right? But I wasn't really crying because of the state of my life. I was more frustrated, I think. And so, meanwhile, I'm still gambling, coking, boozing, and now I'm running out of money. And so I remember wanting to go visit my mom. And I wanted to visit her because I really needed to ask her for rent. And it's a big moment in the story right here. It's just 2017. Stay with me. Thanks for getting this far. So 2017. This is like August. This is probably July. I'm staying at my mom's, and I end up talking to her just like, I need help with rent. Here's what's happening. I blah, blah, blah. I gambled. I'm sorry. And everything. And I remember she was pretty up in arms about it. Like, how do I help you? Do I not help you? And she had to go talk to her friends, and I'm so sorry, Mom, because I put you through some very uncomfortable and painful emotional trials, right? Like asking your mom if she'll pay your rent, and she knows deep down that you need to get help. But my mom ends up doing something that all of us can learn from in this story that I'm very grateful for. So stay with me. My mom says she's going to help me. She's going to pay my rent that month. And she came into Edmonton. And the details are like slightly fuzzy. She remembers them better than me, probably. And she came over to my house with a big bag of groceries. And she said, basically, hey, Mike, here's a bunch of food. I love you. Your rent has been paid. I went to the office. I paid your rent for next month. But I'm not going to give you anything else. I'm not going to give you more rent. I'm not going to give you more food. You got to figure this out. And that's probably one of the greatest gifts she gave me in that moment. Or like maybe period. Because I wouldn't be sitting here on my balcony sober 69 months, smoking a cigar, telling you my fucking recovery story, hoping to inspire you, hoping you'll connect with it, if she hadn't have said, you have responsibility to take. And so my next thing was, okay, this is kind of serious, right? My mom's paying my rent. I'm running out of cash. Like, maybe I'm in trouble. So I'll go to rehab. Okay, I'll go to rehab, right? Because if I go to rehab, then guess what I can get out of it? Now I can be like, hey, Uncle Jim, I went to rehab. Help me, right? So I can keep drinking and gambling after, and he'll still have to help me because I did the thing, right? I did the thing everyone wanted. The thing, I fulfilled the thing that they said I should do, right? Their request. And I was like, then my mom and my sister will stop giving me a hard time for my addictions, or they'll do things for me. Maybe mom will give me more rent or whatever it was. I wanted to go for them, to prove something to them. And then I can't remember exactly when, but everything came to me at once, and I was like, Mike, you got to go to rehab for you. For you. Go for you. For you. And so I went back to Carson. I remember talking to Peter. I remember us sitting on the phone for long hours, multiple times, where he was trying to help me rationally work through, like, this is the right choice, go to rehab, right? And I did the paperwork, and I applied to a couple of spots, And I moved. I had to break a lease. I moved it from where I was living into renting a room at a new spot. And then I stopped drinking and doing drugs sometime in late September, early October was the last time. But I always counted as October 13th, 2017, because the paperwork got done. I got accepted to rehab, and it was at the Centennial Center. So if you know my family, you'll know that it was kind of a big deal that I went to rehab at the Centennial Center, because my dad went to the Centennial Center for rehabilitation physically and mentally, because they have a great program there in Ponoka. But they also have a great program for people with concurrent disorders. And so the concurrent disorder program is for people who have a diagnosed mental health condition and who also have a substance abuse issue. And that's me. Raise your hand, right? I got bipolar 2 and I'm drinking and doing coke and gambling and all this stuff. And so my mom and sister come in early October. We move all of my stuff to the new place. And then we have what was probably the worst. And I all cried and laughed there just now, but probably the worst birthday supper of my entire life was at Boston Pizza Westmount on October the 11th of 2017. So it was all just a mixed emotions. I was there, Kate was there, and even looking at myself in the camera right now, like I'm just so much better and happier, and I'm grateful for all the stuff that's happened to me, you guys. All of anyone watching this, like I'm talking well, I'm together, I'm here, I'm present, I'm happy. And sobriety's fucking great, okay? But that was the hardest birthday that I'd probably ever had. And I mean, I had Christmas with my dad in a rehab facility was tough, but birthday when you're about to get driven to rehab the next day, like any joke that I would make, Mom couldn't take, she's too emotional. And then I was taking things she said the wrong way because I'm deep down just a fucking broken human, right? And so at the 37 and 32 second bit of the video, they drive me to rehab on the 12th. So I go to rehab. And I wake up there on my birthday in 2017, October 13th. And that is probably the greatest day of my life. One of the most important days of my life was the day that I went to rehab. So thanks for sticking with me on this. I know my story's all over the place. Any questions you have, put them down in the chat if you've made it this far. And then I'm going to record another video tomorrow, and we'll start from October 13th on. Shout out to Peter, shout out to Steve, shout out to Kate, shout out to Mom. Like, see if there's lessons in this story even that you can learn yourself or for your kid. Like, say you're a parent of someone who is experiencing addictions, you know, understand something or anything in their life. Like, it doesn't just have to be addictions. It could be like some health struggle or some limiting belief that they have. You can help them, but if you help them to the point where they don't help themselves, it's destructive. Because if my mom had, like, let's hang with this idea. Sorry, I'm scratching my nose, guys. We're on an iPhone. If my mom had kept paying my rent, you know what would have happened? There's a really fucking good chance that I would have called up the old energy company. I would have, you know, I sold for them. I was an all-star at it. I would have got back into that game. I did after I got out of rehab, and I did well. But I would have got back into that game. Mom would have just supplemented my supplemented my rent for a few months, right? Like, okay, let me help you each month, Michael. I'll loan you $5,000, and I wouldn't have had to face myself. I wouldn't have had to face like taking ownership for my life. And so I'm extremely grateful that Kate and Ann, Mom and Kate, my sister Kate, my mom Ann, drove me to rehab the day before my birthday. That is the absolute fucking greatest gift they have given me. Subscribe, guys. Ask me some questions. Thanks for sticking with me. Sober Walsh.